Hello and welcome back to the weekly schedule. So last week was full of amazing stuff. Obviously, Tage Thompson, the best player in fantasy last week. McDavid going full McDavid again. And the streak continues for Mitch Marner. But if you're here, you're looking to gain an advantage in fantasy for the upcoming week. And that's where I can help. So let's jump right into the schedule for week 10. Now, week 10, we're back to almost half the league playing 4 times, but this is a more normal week in the sense that you can get the light nights Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. Previous weeks, these weren't necessarily the light nights. That was the case last week, but this week, those are the light nights. You can see here 6 games Monday, 12 Tuesday, 3 on Wednesday, 12 Thursday, 3 on Friday, 13 on Saturday, and then 5 on Sunday. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday are the light nights. And the best schedule this week, despite all those teams playing 4 times, the best schedule this week is Minnesota. So not only do they have 4 games on all the light nights, a perfect Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, but in addition to that, every game is at home where they average 3.57 goals for per game. And they also play very weak defensive teams that give up goals. So the most difficult defense that they have to face is the Senators, who sit 16th in the league. Everyone else is bottom third of the league, and God forbid the Wings start Nedeljkovic in that game on Wednesday. Detroit will be on the second night of a back-to-back in that game, and they may have to start Ned because they play the Hurricanes the night before, so they may want Husso for that one. So literally everything lines up for the Minnesota Wild this week, and there are players that you can add from the Wild. So let's jump right into some of the Minnesota waiver ads. Now, for Minnesota, let's start with 2 guys that aren't on this list because of their ownership. But if Joel Eriksson Ek or Jared Spurgeon are on your wire, they look like the plays for this week. So Eriksson Ek has 23 points in 27 games this year, 8 power play points, 1 shorthanded goal, and he's averaging 3.2 shots per game as well. Now, he's been hot lately, ranked 71 in category leagues over the last week with 2 goals and 14 shots and some hits and blocks on top of that. But he is for the most part owned up. His ownership is in the high 50s, low 60s, depending on which league you're in. Spurgeon is pretty similar in the ownership percentage, but this is a conversation that bleeds into the first name on our list, and that's Calen Addison. So Addison I mentioned earlier in the year as the power play quarterback in Minnesota, and he was getting tons of assists and power play points at that point in the season. But then he went ice cold throughout November, and he started to heat back up recently with 7 points in his last 8 games and 5 of those on the power play. But the problem is he was a healthy scratch on Saturday night. So Dean Evison isn't seeing what he wants to see out of him, and Saturday night we saw a combination of Alex Goligoski and Jared Spurgeon on the power play unit. Spurgeon has never really been a guy I target in fantasy, but if he's going to be on PP1 and if he's available in your league, it could be the week to try him out. But if Addison is back on Monday night, then he's the ad for me. More power play points and production offensively from Addison, and he's only 12% owned compared to Spurgeon at 54%. Another guy that you could potentially stream, Marcus Foligno, is always a good option for hits. He's a dual eligible winger, 2.85 hits per game, and last night he was on a line with Jordan Greenway and Joel Eriksson Ek. So there is potential for offense there as well. Foligno has seen time on the second line earlier in the previous week, but last night they called up Sammy Walker to play with Goudreau and Boldy on the second line, but that might not be permanent, so just keep an eye on the line assignments and the line combinations. But yeah, Marcus Foligno, always a good hits guy for that purpose. Now, if you're in a deeper league, Connor Dewar has been getting it done lately. We'll have to wait and see how long this lasts, but he's got 5 points in his last 5 games. That's 3 goals, 2 assists, a couple of shots and hits as well, and he's only 1% owned. So nobody is on him yet, and I do want to shout out Boomer Gordon on NHL Radio. He was pimping him out on Friday, and I was watching him earlier than that, just getting a sense of who this guy is because I noticed him all over the ice when I was watching Minnesota games. So he's a guy to keep your eye on this week, and if you're in a deep league, he's a pretty good ad. But the ad of the week for me is going to be Philip Gustafsson, who has won his last 4 starts, and he had a shutout last night against the Canucks, which definitely helped me out because I'm playing AC Delaware River, who had Spencer Martin in that game. So he helped me keep the wins tied, and it also helped one of our Discord members with that Gustafsson call you see on the bottom left. This is one of the reasons you should sign up for the $5 Patreon tier because I typically prioritize my patrons and try to use my knowledge along with the data to make better waiver choices and start-sit options, etc. And I get a lot of comments on YouTube for that kind of stuff, and I just don't have the time to get to it all. I try to answer as many as I can, but I do have to prioritize the people who are supporting me and this channel and allowing me to run this. So if you'd like to become one of them, just click the Patreon link in the description below, and you'll have an edge over everyone else in your league. But getting back to Gustafsson, on the season, a 2.47 goals against and a 920 save percentage, while Fleury has a 316 goals against and an 892 save percentage. So it's looking like Gustafsson is going to keep stealing starts from Fleury, especially since they're fourth in the Central and tied with the Avalanche in points. And this is a week with 4 games, so I would imagine they get an even 2-2 split between the goaltending, but you do want to check those lineups to make sure that that's the case. Now, back at the Week 10 schedule, you'll notice the Calgary Flames may actually have a slightly better schedule because they face a little bit weaker defensive teams, which will help your waiver ads, and it'll give them more of an opportunity to produce for your team. But they do have some travel involved, unlike Minnesota, hence them being number 2 on this list here, but still a great place to mine some fantasy value. So let's see who's a target for this week. Now, one thing that I want to mention before I get into it is last week I mentioned that Calgary has 11 games in 19 days in the month of December up until the 23rd. So this is some place that you could potentially pick these guys up and ride them until Christmas time. So some of these ads are going to be longer term holds, and that's why the number 1 ad I'm thinking about this week is Andrew Mangiapane. So he's 35% owned, a dual eligible winger. He's been underwhelming this year compared to last year. Last year, he scored 35 goals. This year, 6 on the season, 3 of which have come in the last 7 games, though. And he's added 3 assists in that time span for 6 points in his last 7 games. And he's leading the Flames in expected goals at 5-on-5. So that's something to monitor as well. Now, he's playing second line with Dubé and Kadri, so an excellent line assignment because Kadri was ranked 13th in Yahoo category leagues last week with 3 goals, 2 assists, 3 power play points in 4 games, and he scored last night. Mangiapane had 2 assists and 1 of those on the power play, so maybe it's starting to come for this line, and you probably want that Kadri exposure. So Mangiapane is going to be my number 1 ad for Calgary this week. But if you want that exposure but can't get Mangiapane, Dylan Dubé has been arguably better over the last 7 days. Same amount of points, but 8 hits and 8 shots, and he's only 3% owned. So both of those guys playing with Kadri, which is going to get you good line exposure, plenty of ice time, some power play time for some of these guys as well. And then go further down the list, Michael Backlund is another great option. So 6 points in his last 5 games. All of those were assists, but he rang one off the bar last night in Toronto that ended up as an assist. So he is getting some scoring chances to try to make things happen. The only issue is his third line assignment and no PP time. But he has been very productive at the start of December, and that's something to monitor, especially a 4-game week for Calgary this week with some weak defensive opponents and those 11 games in 19 days that we talked about last week and earlier this week. So these are the offensive guys to potentially highlight. Dan Vladar is the goaltender that I wanted to take a little bit more of a deeper dive into, so we'll look at that when we get to the goaltending ads for the week. But just keep that in the back of your mind. We'll come to that in a couple of minutes. Now, the third best schedule is the Montreal Canadiens, who play a good defensive team in Calgary on Monday, then a mid-pack defense, then one of the worst defenses in Anaheim, then a pretty good Tampa Bay team on Saturday. So there will be some scoring opportunities this week, and there are players higher up in the lineup who are available. And the number 1 guy that fits that category mold is Josh Anderson. So this week, 4% owned. He's currently playing on that first line where Kirby Dach used to be. So Kirby Dach now centering the third line. Anderson moves up with Caulfield and Suzuki, which gives him that great line assignment. And he scored 2 goals in his last 3 games, and best of all, only 4% owned, so he's there for you in almost every league. So he's a guy who typically is a power forward who can score. It hasn't necessarily come for him yet, and maybe that's why they pushed him up to the top line with the 2 best players on the team. But that is definitely something to keep an eye on, and he's available in almost every league. Now, if you need a defenseman, Mike Matheson is day-to-day right now with an undisclosed injury, and that is something to monitor because he was on a 3-game point streak with 3 assists, 8 shots, 7 hits, and 2 blocks in those 3 games, and he was seeing PP1 time as well. So he's a sneaky power play quarterback option this week if he's healthy. He gets you that exposure on the power play, and his ownership is at 10%, which makes him available on most waiver wires. So if you're in need of a power play defenseman for this week and Matheson is healthy, that could potentially be the option for you this week. Just make sure that he's getting that PP1 time, because last I checked, they're using 5 forwards right now. So that's something to monitor as well. And another guy who's day-to-day, but you'll want to monitor, is Sean Monahan. He's only 5% owned. He was getting some power play time when he was healthy. He had 9 points in his last 10 games before going out and was averaging 3 shots per game, which gives you a decent floor for the production that you're going to get out of Monahan. Now, last but not least, I just mentioned that they're using 5 guys on the power play, and Mike Hoffman is one of them. Now, he's back in the lineup. He was out with an injury, lower body, but he scored last night against the Kings, had 3 shots, and he's typically a shot volume guy, but he, like I said, he just missed a couple weeks with that lower body injury, and even before that, he wasn't really shooting that much. So hopefully, now that he's back, he's healthy. He is on that power play unit, so he'll get some opportunities to shoot. They're running the 5 forwards, which includes Dadonov, if you're desperate for a left wing, right winger, Kirby Dach, and then Mike Hoffman. So all of those guys are potential owns if they're going to stay on that power play. If Matheson's back, I wonder if they keep Hoffman there, so maybe keep that in mind as you look at the injury reports early in the week. But there's a lot of potential offense to be had, especially in the middle of the week against Ottawa and Anaheim. So that's what I would potentially target for these 2 days, is one of these guys here. Now, for the Sunday schedule next week, if you find yourself desperate for some options on the waiver wire, I have a few suggestions as to what to do before the week starts. Now, I covered the Wild and the Flames ads, so we'll skip them here. But the other 2 teams, there are 2 other teams with 4-game weeks that play on Sunday. And first, monitor the Rangers. They have a difficult game on Monday night against the Devils. That'll be a grudge match. Then they have another game against a top 3 defensive team in the league on Thursday at home against the Leafs. So that'll be difficult as well. But then they do have a back-to-back in Philly and then Chicago, which is a bit of a difficult travel night on the second night of a back-to-back. But the Blackhawks are 25th in the league in goals against, and the Flyers are 28th in expected goals against. So much higher in actual goals thanks to Carter Hart, but their expected goals are pretty low. Both teams are poor defensively and bleed goals. And the options that you can get for the Rangers, especially if you're using this as a midweek ad, let's say you pick them up on Thursday, you get 3 games in 4 nights, and these are the guys you're going to want to target. Basically, the kid line, which may or may not be together, and Braden Schneider. So I watched the Rangers very closely. Lafreniere and Kakko have been playing first line with Zibanejad. They both look very good lately. Kakko is 4th. Lafreniere is 5th on the team in expected goals. They just haven't been going in early in the season, but last week, Lafreniere, 2 goals, 1 assist, 10 shots, 5 hits, 4 blocks in 4 games. So starting to find some production. Kakko had 1 goal to get him going a little bit, but still snake-bitten overall. But I definitely think Kakko is about to break out. Now, Hedl has been excellent this season, as he looks pretty much like he looked last year in the playoffs. And right now, he's centering Panarin and Gaudreau. So that's a line that's been producing after being put together. You could also try to target Gaudreau, but he is completely line dependent. If he ends up outside the top 6, he's not really ownable. But the kid line is currently all in the top 6, and their ownership is relatively low considering that fact. So 22% for Lafreniere, 4% Kakko, 7% Hedl, and then 1% for Braden Schneider. And that might be the best story for the Rangers in the past couple of weeks. Braden Schneider, in the last month, only 3 defensemen in the league have more goals than Schneider, and that would be John Carlson, Philip Hronek, and Cale Makar. Schneider is a deeper league play as he's on the third pair, doesn't get much power play time, but his 5-on-5 goal production has been more than expected, and he's playing great two-way hockey, getting some hits and blocks on a nightly basis, and a few shots and goals here and there. He has 4 goals since November 22nd, which is the most in the league by a defenseman. So he's been getting it done, and sometimes he pops off for 4 or 5 shots and 4 or 5 hits or blocks per game. So in a if you're picking him up on a Thursday, you're probably going to get a lot of hits and blocks in this game, and you might get some offense in these 2 games. He's been feeling it a lot lately. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention was the Ottawa Senators. So they play Sunday against a weak defensive team. The Wild are 21st in the league in goals against, and the Sens are the most snake-bitten team in the league at 15 goals below expected. And if you look at the top players below expected, there's 4 Senators in that list, and 3 of them aren't ownable, but one of them is, and that's Tyler Mott. So Mott, 2% owned, dual eligible winger, almost 5 goals below expected. He should break out a little bit. He's not necessarily a goal scorer. He's not necessarily a guy who's going to get you a ton of offensive production. He hasn't scored since October 22nd, so he's definitely due. But he is mainly good for shots, hits, and blocks. There may be more consistent options out there if you're looking for those category coverages, but this is a buy low opportunity, trying to find a trend in the data. He has a 4-game week against Anaheim, Montreal, Detroit, and Minnesota, all pretty weak defensive teams. So, this could be the potential week for him to have some production. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention is Shane Pinto. I mentioned him early in the season when he was scoring every night as a potential regression candidate. And in the month of October, his shooting percentage was 42.9%, which is obviously unsustainable. November, it was down to 9.7, which does seem a little bit more normal. But I'd imagine with him getting second-line minutes with DeBrincat and Batherson, he'll start to produce a little bit more going forward, especially with the defenses that they're facing this week. And he's only 9% owned, so that's a potential waiver play of the week for Ottawa because he's going to be getting a lot more offensive opportunity than Tyler Mott. But these are the Sunday plays. We mentioned the Wild. We mentioned the Flames here playing the Sharks. The Sharks are bleeding goals left and right, and they have James Reimer, who's still currently on IR. Some of these other matchups, the Jets and the Kraken, that's going to be a good game. Both pretty good teams offensively and defensively. The Penguins-Hurricanes game, that should be low scoring, but you never know. Penguins are rolling right now. 4 straight wins for them. 5 straight wins, actually, for them. And then the Senators we just mentioned. So this is what it looks like for Sunday, but keep an eye on Data Draft Instagram because I usually try to update on Sunday morning what are the potential ads for the day. I didn't get a chance to do that today. I was watching both my boys, but next week I should be available to do that for you. So keep an eye on the Data Draft Instagram for some daily Sunday ads. Now, Week 10 goalie ads starts with a trend I mentioned in last week's video, which is the Calgary Flames playing 11 games in 19 days. And this was supposed to mean a few spot starts for Dan Vladar, but what's been happening instead is he's been stealing starts from Markstrom. So Vladar started 3 games in a row against Washington, Arizona, and Minnesota. He won all 3 of those. Then Markstrom gets back in against the lowly Columbus Blue Jackets and loses 3-1, which is kind of unpredictable. So Vladar had 4 wins in a row leading up to last night's game. Last night did not go well for him. 5 goals on 34 shots, an .853 save percentage, and the loss. This may mean that they'll use Markstrom against Montreal on Monday, and maybe Markstrom gets the Wednesday start against Vancouver as well. The best spot to start Vladar for your fantasy team would be against St. Louis on Friday. They're the lowest ranked offense of the 4 teams that they play this week. But they're likely to get a W on Sunday against the Sharks, so that could be a good spot to start Vladar if he's in net. On the season, Vladar, 2.59 goals against and a .912 save percentage, while Markstrom has a .293 goals against and an .891. But Markstrom does have the 8 wins in 18 games. Vladar has 5 wins in 10. And Markstrom also has a .911 save percentage over the last 2 weeks, which does bode well for Markstrom owners and the Flames in general. So if you do own Markstrom, he is getting better. He is getting his game in order despite what you saw against Columbus. The numbers are starting to improve. Now, our number 2 goalie ad of the week, as I mentioned in the Minnesota segment, Philip Gustafsson, only 11% owned, 1.41 goals against, and a .949 save percentage in his last 4 starts. They have a 4-game week this week. He should get 2 of those starts. Just monitor which games. But I'm not going to go into too much detail as we covered him a little bit earlier before. Now, I quickly want to mention that Carolina has a back-to-back Saturday-Sunday against Dallas and Pittsburgh. Now, Freddie Anderson is practicing, and he may return. And I'm interested to see who stays with the Canes and who gets sent down when he's back, because without question, Kochetkov has been the better of the 2 goalies between he and Ranta. So keep an eye out for that. See who gets sent down. I would imagine it's Kochetkov because he probably doesn't have to go through waivers. So then that would mean Ranta would get one of these 2 starts. But yeah, just definitely keep an eye on that heading into the week because Anderson should be coming back some point in this week. Now, you'll also want to stream Kevin Lankinen early in the week. Only 4% owned. The Preds play back-to-back at St. Louis and then home against Edmonton. And I would imagine that Saros gets the Edmonton game and Lankinen starts against the Blues, who are 10th in the league in goals for, but also 27th in goals against, which may make for a high-scoring game. It is worth noting that Nashville is second worst in the league in goals for, but they'll be facing Thomas Greiss in that game, and he's got a 3.69 goals against and an .899 save percentage this year, which is much worse than Lankinen. Lankinen has been very good, as you see his numbers on the screen, 2.27 and a 934 with 3 wins. Lastly, we come to a goalie that I've believed in since last year, but a team that struggled a bit this year, but their goals against is trending up since they got Cam Talbot back, and that is Anton Forsberg. Now, the Sens play back-to-back in Detroit Friday and in Minnesota Saturday, and both the Wings and the Wild are directly behind the Senators for 20 and 21st in the league in goals for. So there's no telling what will happen here, but Forsberg is a good goalie with good stats over the last 2 weeks, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there. And that brings us to our Week 10 hot players that you may be able to get on the wire. A lot of these guys are owned up. Obviously, some of these guys are having incredible seasons so far. You can see some of the best names in the league are on this list, but then there's also some guys that I've mentioned before that are still on this list. Jared McCann, I mentioned him this time last week, and since then, 2 games, 1 goal, 6 shots, 2 hits, but it was a light week for the Kraken. But this week they have 3 games, and McCann still sits at 18% ownership, so he is available for most leagues. He's dual center left wing eligible. He gets PP 1 time as well, and he has 4 goals in his last 5 games for 12 goals on the season. So he's a guy that you definitely want to keep your eye on, especially if you're in need of a flexible center that can get you goal production. Another guy you may want to be able to stream on the wire is Lawson Crouse, who's quietly also has 12 goals on the year this season. So 2 goals, 1 assist, 4 shots in a 4-3 win over Boston on Friday, which was very unexpected. But I did kind of mention that last week, saying that the only way that they would win is if Boston took them lightly, and they kind of did, and Swayman didn't have his best game either. Now, the Yotes play the Sharks on Tuesday, which may be a goal fest. They have the Isles Friday and then the Sabres on Saturday, so maybe not the best week to stream Crouse, but for a nightly stream, if you need him for 1 game, that could be an option, and he does get a lot of goals and power play time as well. Last but not least, Victor Olofsson, also with 12 goals on the year. I sense a theme here. He had 1 goal, 1 assist, 1 power play point, and 5 shots last week, but he's a guy that scores in bunches and does a lot on the PP. Lately, it's been Tage Thompson ripping bombs on the power play, but I would imagine with Jeff Skinner out, still suspended, that Victor Olofsson will probably get more opportunity on the top unit. The Sabres play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and have the Kings, Avs, and Coyotes, so you may be able to get 3 quality games out of him this week, as the Kings and Coyotes bleed goals, and the Avs are a bit banged up right now. Now, as we look for the guys who are cold and about to break out, some of these guys are ownable, but I do want to highlight 2 guys in particular, and that's Eric Haula and Stefan Noesen. So Haula is 13% owned, currently playing with Jack Hughes and Dawson Mercer, excellent line exposure, and he's been atop this list for a few weeks now. So the longer that happens, the likelihood that he breaks out increases. 0 goals in 9 games for Haula, 5 assists, and 1 on the power play in that span. But this is kind of what you look for here. A guy with a great line assignment, getting tons of chances, low shooting percentage, and no goals recently. So I would expect him to start producing in a 4-game week, especially playing alongside Jack Hughes, who is on fire right now. And the other guy, Stefan Noesen, only 1% owned. A very random name that some of you don't pay any attention to, but he is consistently the net front guy on the first power play unit, which is something that may be hurting a guy like Seth Jarvis, but it does help Noesen. He's not that high on this list, only 3.7 below expected, but that power play 1 line assignment and his ownership mixed with a 4-game week, and then if you add to that the injuries to Aho and Fost, and he becomes a little bit more valuable on the waiver wire, especially in deeper leagues. He's getting you power play 1 exposure, and he's only 1% owned, so that is something to keep an eye on. And his shooting percentage will go up if he starts tipping some of these in, because he's not necessarily shooting the puck, he's just tipping them and they go directly in. So something to keep an eye on there. Jason Zucker might be there for you, Barabanov might be there for you, but you typically want to get guys who have higher expected goal numbers, and a lot of those guys are owned up. DeBrincat, Kachuk, Sam Bennett, I mentioned last week, Drake Batherson. So yeah, some of these guys, Boone Jenner might be available for you, but his shooting percentage is relatively normal. And I really don't advise a lot of the players that are going, that you can potentially find in Columbus. He would be one of them, though, that you would potentially want. But that's going to do it for the cold streaks this week. And that brings us to this week in THHL. And it's the grudge match with my arch nemesis, AC Delaware River. This week started with two awful starts, one from Binnington for me and Spencer Martin for him. And both of those guys were, we were starting from, basically nothing. I believe Binnington had a 750 save percentage and Spencer Martin kind of climbed up to an 852, but he was horrendous early in the week. And the entire week hinges on Hellebuyck against the Caps tonight. So as you can see, the goaltending is very tight. I currently barely have save percentage and goals against. We're tied in wins. If Hellebuyck gets the win, he takes that. If he plays well and gets the loss, he might take these two. So it's going to come down to that one game. I need the Caps to basically chase him from the game in the first or second period in order to have a chance. I did add Alec Martinez 4 blocks as I'm currently down by 5, and he's the only man on the planet that could give me a shot to tie or win that category. But this matchup could go either way, and the winner likely takes first place, as you can see here. So a lot riding on this. I'm only 2 points back of him for first place. So everything comes down to today. I've used up all my ads, so we just got to wait and see what happens. But that's going to do it for this weekly schedule video. Make sure to like and subscribe. Share this with anyone who may be interested. Follow on Instagram at data_draft. And I will see you in the next one.